Every single year, millions of people make the exact same promise to themselves. They whisper quietly in their own minds, "This time things are going to be different." They feel a sudden surge of motivation. They feel energized, focused, and completely ready to finally change the trajectory of their lives. Maybe it's the spark of a new year. Maybe it's the rush after watching a deeply inspiring video. Or maybe it's just a breaking point where they demand more from life. And for a few fleeting days, everything seems to work perfectly. They wake up before the sun. They start exercising. They attack their goals with relentless focus. In those initial moments, they feel productive, highly disciplined, and completely in control of their destiny. But then, something incredibly predictable begins to happen. The initial high of motivation begins to fade. Those early mornings suddenly become much harder to conquer. The daily workouts start to feel like an optional chore rather than a requirement. The ambitions that felt so urgent yesterday slowly lose their importance today. And within just a few short weeks, the comfortable old habits quietly creep back in. When this happens, most people believe the problem is entirely their fault. They think the solution is simple, they just need to find more motivation. They search for more inspiration. They try to manufacture more willpower. They tell themselves they just need to summon a little more sheer determination. But what if that core belief is the exact thing holding you back? What if motivation is actually the most unreliable force in the entire landscape of personal growth? And what if the most highly disciplined people in the world rarely, if ever, depend on motivation at all? In this video, we are going to uncover an uncomfortable but incredibly powerful truth. Motivation is a trap. The people who consistently succeed and build remarkable lives do not rely on how they feel. Instead, they rely on rock-solid systems. And once you truly understand the critical difference between the two, the way you approach discipline, habits, and success will never be the same again. Most people look at the world's highest achievers and believe that motivation is the absolute foundation of their success. They assume that these highly disciplined people simply possess an endless supply of motivation, boundless energy, and an unbreakable inner drive. From the outside looking in, this explanation makes perfect sense. When we see someone waking up at dawn, hitting the gym, and working relentlessly, it is incredibly easy to assume that they must wake up feeling completely inspired and eager to conquer the day every single morning. But this widespread assumption hides a much deeper, more dangerous problem. The reality is, motivation is not a stable, enduring force. Motivation is simply an emotional state, and just like happiness, sadness, or anger, it naturally rises and inevitably falls. Think back to the very last time you felt deeply, profoundly motivated to change your life. Maybe it happened right after finishing an incredibly inspiring book, listening to a powerful speech, or vividly imagining a much better version of your future. In that specific, fleeting moment, absolutely everything feels possible. You picture yourself waking up early, working with intense focus, and executing a flawless daily routine. That future version of you looks highly disciplined, wildly productive, and completely unstoppable. But here is the hidden weakness of motivation. It fades, and it fades quickly. Because motivation is entirely fueled by your emotions, and human emotions are, by their very nature, temporary. All it takes is one stressful day at the office, a single poor night of sleep, or a sudden wave of unexpected daily responsibilities. And just like that, the burning motivation that felt so incredibly powerful yesterday is suddenly reduced to a weak, flickering ember today. When that feeling of motivation disappears, the positive behaviors that depended on it disappear just as fast. This is exactly why so many ambitious goals completely collapse after just a short, intense burst of initial enthusiasm. People start out with massive excitement, but they build their entire foundation of progress on an emotion that cannot possibly support long-term consistency. The harsh truth is that the problem isn't laziness. The real problem is that people are relying on the completely wrong psychological mechanism. Motivation feels incredibly powerful because it creates a massive spike of intensity. But we must remember, intensity is not the same thing as consistency. A person might feel fiercely motivated for 3 solid days, but genuine, life-altering progress is built quietly over hundreds and thousands of days. The real danger of motivation is that it tricks your brain into believing that discipline is an emotional requirement. It convinces you that you must feel completely ready, energized, and in the right mood before you can finally take action. So, you wait. You wait for the perfect mood to strike. You wait for the right energy levels. You wait for the stars to align in that perfect moment. But the uncomfortable truth that most people avoid is this: that perfect, frictionless moment almost never arrives. The rare individuals who consistently achieve their wildest goals are absolutely not the ones who wake up feeling motivated every single day. They are the ones who deliberately built airtight systems, structures that force them to take action even when their motivation is completely dead. And the moment you finally grasp this subtle difference, your entire understanding of what it means to be disciplined will shift forever. Let's imagine a highly relatable story. A scenario that might feel uncomfortably familiar to many of us. Let's introduce a person named Daniel. Daniel is filled with ambition. He desperately wants to get in better shape, advance his career, master new skills, and construct a brighter future for himself. And, much like the vast majority of society, Daniel is fully convinced that the master key to unlocking all of these goals is pure motivation. One quiet evening, after consuming a deeply inspiring video about success, Daniel feels an absolute surge of electric energy coursing through him. "This is it," he declares quietly to himself. "Tomorrow is the day that absolutely everything changes." And so he carefully architects his new life. He maps out a flawless morning routine. Wake up exactly at 5:30 a.m. Endure a grueling 1-hour workout. Read 30 pages of a book. He plans to work intensely on his most ambitious personal goals before the rest of the world even wakes up. And for the first few days, it works perfectly. Daniel wakes up before dawn. He crushes his workouts. He feels wildly productive, deeply proud, and entirely in command of his life. In those initial glowing moments, discipline feels completely effortless. And why wouldn't it? The roaring fire of motivation is still burning bright. But exactly 1 week later, the atmosphere begins to shift. One night, Daniel goes to sleep late after a particularly exhausting day at work. The very next morning, the alarm blares in the darkness at 5:30 a.m. But this time, the internal dialogue in his mind sounds very different. "You're exhausted," the voice whispers. "You worked hard yesterday. You deserve just a little more rest. Missing just one single day won't matter at all." Daniel reaches over and hits the snooze button. The very next morning, the exact same rationalization happens again. The powerful motivation is now just a whisper. Within a mere 2 weeks, that grand, ambitious early morning routine has vanished completely. Daniel is left feeling bitterly frustrated and defeated. He begins to internalize the failure. He believes there is a fundamental flaw in his character. He assumes he simply lacks discipline or doesn't have enough willpower. But Daniel's true problem has absolutely nothing to do with a lack of willpower. His fatal flaw was the foundational strategy he chose to use. Daniel built the entire architecture of his routine on the shaky ground of motivation. And as we know, motivation is highly unstable. The moment the emotional high disappeared, the entire behavioral structure violently collapsed. Now, let's imagine a second person with those exact same ambitions. This individual refuses to depend on the unpredictability of motivation. Instead of relying on feelings, they meticulously design a system. Their workout clothes are intentionally placed right beside the bed the night before. Their alarm clock is positioned across the room, forcing them to physically stand up. Their exercise routine isn't a grueling hour. It is simple, short, and highly sustainable. Even on the darkest, most difficult mornings, the system gently forces action. They do not pause to ask themselves how they feel. They strictly obey the physical structure they have engineered for their own life. Weeks slowly turn into months. This second person does not wake up feeling wildly motivated every single day, but they continue showing up without fail. And as time compounds, something truly profound happens. A quiet, unbreakable consistency begins to permanently replace the need for motivation. Massive results finally begin to materialize, not because they magically felt inspired every morning, but because their system relentlessly pushed them forward. This is the monumental difference that most people go their entire lives without seeing. Motivation is fantastic for creating initial excitement, but it is carefully designed automated systems that actually forge real long-term progress. To truly understand exactly why motivation fails us so consistently, we have to understand something fundamental about the human brain. Your brain, in its natural biological state, is simply not designed to help you achieve grand, long-term goals. Instead, it is biologically hardwired to strictly conserve your energy and relentlessly seek out immediate, short-term rewards. From an evolutionary standpoint, human survival depended entirely on efficiency. Early humans could not afford to waste precious energy. They actively avoided any strenuous activity that didn't produce an immediate, tangible benefit. Securing food, safety, and shelter were the only true priorities. Because of this ancient programming, the brain developed a highly powerful system driven entirely by a chemical called dopamine. Dopamine is the primary chemical deeply associated with anticipation, craving, and the powerful feeling of reward. Whenever we vividly imagine achieving something deeply meaningful, getting completely healthy, building massive wealth, or transforming our lives, the brain immediately releases a massive surge of dopamine. This chemical flood creates a deeply intoxicating feeling of excitement. In that specific moment, it actually feels exactly like progress. But here is the fascinating and somewhat cruel catch. The brain routinely releases dopamine simply when we think about initiating change, not when we actually do the difficult work to achieve it. This is exactly why the simple act of planning out new, ambitious goals can feel so incredibly motivating. Buying a pristine new notebook, creating a highly detailed daily schedule, vividly imagining that successful future version of yourself. In those quiet planning moments, your brain actively rewards you with a massive spike of motivation without you actually doing anything. But the very second the actual physical work begins, your brain drastically and immediately shifts its core priorities. Those planned workouts suddenly become physically agonizing. The intense studying requires an uncomfortable amount of deep, sustained concentration. The sheer effort required no longer provides any immediate, satisfying rewards. The instant gratification is completely gone. And when any task requires long, sustained effort without an instant payoff, the brain immediately begins hunting for much easier alternatives, mindlessly scrolling through a smartphone, binge-watching entertaining videos, doing any trivial task that provides incredibly fast feedback and cheap pleasure. The human brain naturally, inevitably drifts toward what behavioral psychologists refer to as low-resistance behaviors. This deeply ingrained biological reality is exactly why motivation seemingly disappears the very minute the real difficult work actually begins. Losing your motivation is absolutely not a sign of mental weakness. It is simply a highly predictable feature of how your brain operates. Motivation is at its absolute strongest when we simply imagine success. But real discipline is demanded when we must repeat small, boring actions. Repeating those small actions without any emotional excitement is exactly where the vast majority of people completely break down and struggle. They hold on to the false belief that highly successful people must simply feel motivated much more often than everyone else. But the hidden reality is vastly different. Highly disciplined individuals intimately understand that motivation is fundamentally untrustworthy. Instead of passively waiting to feel motivated, they intentionally build systems that make the desired behavior drastically easier to actually perform. They aggressively remove all friction from their good, productive habits, and they deliberately increase the friction for all their bad, destructive habits. By engineering their environment this way, they are brilliantly working with the brain's natural, lazy tendencies instead of constantly fighting against them. Because they know the fundamental truth, the human brain will almost always unconsciously choose the exact path that feels the easiest in that moment. The genuine secret of unbreakable discipline is not forcing yourself into a brutal, exhausting fight against your own brain every single day. It is meticulously designing intelligent systems that quietly, automatically guide your daily behavior in the exact right direction. Relying entirely on motivation might seem completely harmless at first glance, but over time, it creates a toxic pattern. It quietly, almost invisibly, holds people back from making any genuine, long-term progress in their lives. Because motivation is inherently unpredictable, the physical effort it produces is just as wildly unpredictable. On certain days, people feel incredibly energized, highly productive, and completely confident about their future. They wake up early, attack their ambitious goals, and feel like they are finally on the exact right path. But on other days, that magical feeling of motivation simply isn't there. It completely vanishes without warning. And when the motivation disappears, the daily action that depended on it instantly disappears right along with it. The tragic result is a vicious cycle that millions of people experience, usually without ever fully realizing it. They start out incredibly strong. They feel a deep burning excitement about finally changing their lives for the better. But the moment that emotional energy fades, those fragile new habits immediately begin to collapse under the pressure. Days of inaction quickly turn into weeks. Weeks silently bleed into months. And eventually, the goal itself feels completely unrealistic. At this painful breaking point, many people arrive at a completely false and deeply damaging personal conclusion. They start to truly believe that the core problem is their own personality. They assume their character is permanently flawed. They tell themselves, "I'm just not disciplined enough. I always lose my motivation. I simply lack willpower." But the absolute truth is that the real problem has nothing to do with their character or their internal strength. The actual problem is the deeply flawed strategy they were relying on from the very beginning. When your life's progress depends entirely on motivation, your progress becomes incredibly unstable and fragile. It moves forward rapidly when your emotions are running high, and it completely stops the second your emotions drop low. But this creates another, much darker hidden consequence that silently destroys a person's future potential. Every single time a person excitedly starts a new habit and then abandons it, their internal self-confidence slowly weakens. They begin to deeply distrust their own promises. They realize their own personal commitments carry absolutely no weight. A person might promise themselves they will start exercising daily, learn a complex new skill, or finally focus on their career. But when they repeat this painful pattern of extreme enthusiasm followed by quiet abandonment, a dangerous belief takes root. A quiet, destructive voice in their head whispers, "Maybe I'm just not the kind of person who follows through." This specific belief is incredibly dangerous, because once you begin to doubt your own ability to stay consistent, you slowly start lowering your expectations for your own life. You attempt far fewer ambitious goals. You take fewer risks. You gradually, painfully accept a much smaller, far less fulfilling version of your true human potential. And all of this happens simply because they fundamentally misunderstood one of the most important rules of success. True discipline was never, ever supposed to come from a temporary feeling of motivation. It was always supposed to come from rigid structure, from carefully engineered systems that make daily action possible. Even on the darkest, most difficult days when your motivation is completely and utterly absent. And the very moment a person finally realizes this truth, they begin to see discipline in a completely different, life-changing way. Eventually, almost everyone on the path to self-improvement reaches a profound turning point. They experience a realization that completely changes how they view discipline, even if it feels uncomfortable at first. This powerful realization is simply this: highly successful people are absolutely not more motivated than the rest of us. They are simply much less dependent on the feeling of motivation. For years, society has trained us to believe that discipline is an emotional state. We falsely assume that top performers wake up every single day feeling completely energized and ready to conquer their goals. But if you actually sit down and speak with highly disciplined individuals, you hear a surprisingly different story. They don't constantly feel inspired. In fact, many mornings they wake up feeling completely exhausted and distracted. The defining difference is never about how they feel. The real difference is what they choose to do despite those feelings. At some point, they stop asking themselves one very dangerous question. They stop waking up and asking, "Do I feel motivated today?" Instead, they replace it with a far more powerful objective question: what exactly does my system say I need to do next? This mental shift might seem incredibly small, but it changes absolutely everything. Because the moment your daily behavior is guided by a reliable system, it no longer drains your limited emotional energy. Think about a simple habit like brushing your teeth. You do not wait for a spark of deep inspiration before you do it. It is simply part of your routine. The behavior is entirely automatic. That exact same principle applies to your most productive, ambitious habits. When a positive behavior is fully integrated into a system, it completely stops being a heavy decision that requires daily motivation. It transforms into a default action. The system completely removes the exhausting need to constantly negotiate with yourself. Because without a system in place, every single action becomes a draining mental debate. You constantly ask, should I wake up early today? Should I go to the gym? Should I actually work on my goals? And when given a choice, your brain will naturally choose the easier option. But when a solid system is finally in place, those exhausting questions completely disappear. The physical structure of your daily routine quietly, automatically guides your behavior forward. This is the exact moment discipline begins to feel vastly different. It no longer feels like a brutal, endless battle against your own mind. It feels like walking a clear path that is already laid out. Once people deeply internalize this shift, they completely stop chasing the ghost of motivation. They start building systems that make the right choices effortless. And that is where true, unbreakable discipline begins. Understanding that systems create discipline is a deeply powerful realization. But merely understanding the concept is simply not enough to change your life. The real transformation only happens when you finally begin building physical systems that actively guide your daily behavior. Here are 5 highly practical steps that will permanently help you replace fleeting motivation with unbreakable structure. Step 1. Make the first action impossibly small. One of the greatest mistakes people make is trying to completely transform their lives overnight. They plan grueling 2-hour workouts. They design overly complex routines and create wildly unrealistic daily schedules. This aggressive approach depends entirely on massive amounts of motivation. And the second that motivation fades, the entire system violently collapses. Instead, you must start with daily actions that are almost impossible to avoid. Just 5 minutes of exercise, reading a single page of a book. These small actions might feel completely insignificant at first, but they hold a massive psychological advantage. They are incredibly easy to repeat. And consistent repetition is the absolute foundation of all discipline. Remember, long-term consistency will always beat short-term intensity. Step 2. Meticulously design your environment. Human behavior is heavily influenced by the immediate physical surroundings we live in. Most people try to stubbornly force new habits using sheer willpower alone. But as we know, willpower is a highly unreliable resource. Your environment, on the other hand, is a powerful, invisible hand. If your phone sits right next to you while working, distraction becomes the default. If unhealthy food sits out in plain sight on the kitchen counter, Daily temptation dramatically increases and drains your mental energy, but making small, deliberate changes in your environment can guide your behavior entirely automatically, without you even having to think about it. Leave a book in the exact spot you normally scroll on your phone. Lay your workout clothes out completely ready the night before. When your physical environment actually supports your ultimate goals, staying disciplined requires a fraction of the mental effort. Step 3. Attach new habits to existing routines. One of the absolute easiest ways to build consistency is through a method called habit stacking. This simply means attaching a brand new behavior directly to something you already do every single day without fail. For example, the moment you finish pouring your morning coffee, commit to reading just one page of a book. The moment you finish brushing your teeth, commit to stretching for just 2 minutes. The old, existing habit acts as an automatic trigger. Over time, these daily behaviors deeply link together in your brain. The entire system simply begins to run itself on autopilot. Step 4. Aggressively remove friction from your good habits. Every single action in life has a specific level of resistance, or friction. The higher the friction a habit has, the less likely you are to actually perform it consistently over a long period of time. If exercising requires driving 30 minutes across a busy town, massive motivation becomes an absolute necessity just to get there. But if your workout space is already perfectly prepared right in your living room, that massive mental barrier completely disappears. The ultimate goal is incredibly simple. Make your good habits as easy as possible to start, and make your bad habits annoyingly difficult to access. Step 5. Focus strictly on showing up, not on perfection. Millions of people abandon their new habits because they falsely believe every attempt must be flawless. If they miss just one single day, they internalize it and feel like an absolute failure. But true discipline is never built through perfection. It is built entirely through relentless repetition. Even the most highly disciplined people in the world have terrible, imperfect days. The golden rule to follow is astonishingly simple. Never miss twice. If you completely skip a workout today, forgive yourself, but show up tomorrow. Real, tangible progress simply comes from returning back to your established system, again and again, no matter what happens. Over time, these incredibly small systems will radically begin to shape your automatic behavior. You will no longer pray for random bursts of motivation. You will simply follow the quiet, reliable structure you created for yourself. And slowly, something deeply powerful will begin to happen in your life. Discipline will completely stop feeling like a heavy, exhausting mental effort. It will finally start feeling exactly like your natural daily routine. Motivation will always feel incredibly powerful. It manufactures a rush of pure excitement, endless energy, and the intoxicating illusion that your life is finally about to change. But motivation is merely a fragile beginning. Left entirely to itself, it rapidly fades. Life gets overwhelmingly busy. Your daily energy drops. Unexpected, stressful problems inevitably appear. And the second that motivation finally disappears, any fragile progress built on top of it collapses instantly. This is exactly why millions of people feel permanently trapped. They endlessly repeat the exact same painful cycle, a sudden, massive burst of inspiration, a short, exhausting period of effort, and then a quiet surrender to their old habits. But the moment you finally grasp the profound difference between chasing motivation and building actual systems, a monumental mental shift completely transforms the way you live. You permanently stop asking yourself the one dangerous, exhausting question that most people ask every single morning of their lives. Do I actually feel motivated today? Instead, you replace it with a vastly more powerful objective question. You simply ask yourself, what exactly does my system require me to do today? That single mental shift entirely removes your fragile emotions from the decision-making process. You completely stop depending on how you happen to feel in that specific, fleeting moment. You simply obey the quiet, reliable structure you built for yourself. And over a long enough timeline, those impossibly small, repeated actions begin to massively compound. One single workout quietly becomes 10. 10 workouts seamlessly become 100. Reading just one page a day eventually becomes an entire library of consumed knowledge. These tiny, systematic habits slowly and inevitably construct a completely unrecognizable version of your life. This is the quiet, unbreakable power of a well-designed system. Systems absolutely will not create a dramatic, cinematic transformation overnight, but they create something infinitely more valuable than a sudden burst of energy. They create pure consistency. And when you zoom out and look at the long run of a human life, boring consistency will absolutely always outperform fleeting motivation. If you found any genuine value in this video, please consider sharing it with someone who desperately needs this exact reminder today. And make sure to subscribe to Wealth Waves for much more deep insight on mastering your mindset, building unbreakable discipline, and elevating your financial intelligence. Before you go, I want you to take a quiet moment and seriously reflect on one single, incredibly important question. What is one tiny system you could start building right now, today, that would guarantee your life moves forward, even on the dark days when your motivation is completely gone?